Okay, while I was at it making the other video, I decided to go ahead and give it a shot again with a little bit different story. As you can see, I took my sweater off. It was getting a little bit hot in here, so I am in Florida, and so it's still pretty warm down here. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the place of Scripture as far as what it was. I think we can have a misunderstanding of what exactly Scripture was. And another story I came up with to kind of explain this would be a graphic design firm. And let's just say I have a graphic design firm in a major city, and I take on an apprentice to study under me, and he spends about let's say 5 to 10 years working directly under me. And what I do is I train him what it means to be a graphic designer, how you interface with clients, how you the procedures for work, and concepting, brainstorming, the entire process. He is under my tutelage for years, and finally there comes a point where I'm like, well, it'd be really nice to have a remote office in this other city. And so I approach him one day and I tell him, I say, I'd like to send you to this city, and I would like you to set up a design firm, and that firm is going to represent my name. Okay, you can run it. You can be able to take a lot of the profits, but on that firm, it's going to have my name. So it's going to be very important that you run that design shop as I would run that design shop. Okay, so he goes and he sets up his shop, and I go there with him, and we find some nice office space, and we're working with clients. We get a nice clientele going there, and I returned back to the studio. Then about 2 or 3 years later, I start getting a little bit of feedback just in the rumor mill that this guy's doing things a little bit different than what we remember. We remember you being a little bit more emphasized on the concept. This guy seems to be a little bit more emphasized on just eye candy and getting the job done. So think, okay, I need to go pay this guy a visit. So I go and I get in my car and I drive and visit and spend a good week with him and kind of just shadow him for a while. And there's a lot of stuff he's doing right, but there's a few things that are just kind of he's just not got right, and then there's other things that are like, where on earth did that come from? So trying to think, okay, well, how do I break this to him, and what do I need to do? So I drive back and kind of think about it and end up writing him a letter. And the letter sort of goes along some lines of, hey, it was great being with you. I really missed you. Reminded me of old times, all those late nighters and coffee. It was just really good to see what you're doing. It looks like the business is thriving. However, there's things you're doing that are a concern to me that need to be corrected, adjusted. And these are those things. And so I go through a list and say, I think you need to be really pushing yourself in the area of strategy versus just trying to make something look fancy and out the door, or you need to be putting a little bit more effort into the projects, or your client relations, you need to be doing a little bit better job there. So I just give him a list of items that he's kind of missing, and so let's just say some time passes, and in another country, some guy who just happens to find these letters that I've written to him, and he's like, "Wow, I know about this design firm. This was a master design firm, and this stuff was written by the guy, and by golly, I'm gonna start a design firm, and we are gonna follow this letter to a T." Okay, and so he starts out his design firm, and what he thinks is a manual is basically my letters to an apprentice to correct him. And so, maybe one day he goes to a design conference, in the country the original design firm was, and he meets a designer that works at a design firm in that same city. And he's looking at him and says, well, why do you use those tools? Why do you use an X-Acto blade? Or, why are you doing it that way? And he's like, well, this is the way it was taught to me and handed down, and we've always done it this way. He says, well, look, I've got the letter from the guy, and it's not in there. So why do you think the guy was doing it if it's not in the letter? And the answer to that's very simple, and that is they were already doing it. He wasn't messing it up, so there was no reason to correct it. So, then you find out that the person that he's talking to in this design firm is actually working in the exact same design firm. And that design firm hasn't gone anywhere. Instead, that apprentice had another apprentice, had another one, and they always did things the way the guy had taught them, because the guy's name was on the design firm. That was his brand. And they understood that they had to be faithful to the name they represented. And so when they started their new design firm or took over the main office, it wasn't about how do I make this my own show, my interpretation of a design firm. They said, what was taught to us by our master? What was handed down? How do we operate as a design firm? And that's how they operated. And they had access to those letters, and they would be the first to say, yeah, those are authoritative letters. But the difference is those letters didn't exist in isolation. They existed within a whole that was passed down from generation to generation. Whereas this other designer had a very narrow strata of information that he was applying in a global sort of covering of what it meant to be a graphic designer. He just didn't have all the information, and he thought he did. So that's where we find ourselves with Scripture, is that, the Scriptures were written just like that letter to the design firm as a source of correction and encouragement. They were not manuals that were sent out for self-start churches, because that was never the way God intended the church to grow. And really, that's not the way you would grow a business. McDonald's does not send out manuals to people who want to open a franchise. They take them back to the headquarters and they train them until those managers understand what it means to be a McDonald's manager and understand that philosophy and can effectively pass it on. And that's smart business. And it starts with the church. Everything we're seeing in business, we're seeing in the church, is that you pass it on through relationship, training, and then commissioning. You don't just send out a manual and says, well, this is a book, and this is how you run a McDonald's, and, we're going to come back in 5 years or 2,000 years and find a McDonald's that is functioning as it should. That's ridiculous. And, so to place in Scripture this complete blanket of, authority is misguided. It's not to take away from the authority of it. The McDonald's training manual is still the McDonald's training manual, okay? But it's not the complete picture. It's not the system. And the church had a system, and that was discipleship, training and raising up, and commissioning. And anyway, so that's a little bit of an analogy. I'm kind of polishing it, but it's something that I think has helped, kind of clarify and kind of sidestep some of the hot potato issues when you start talking about Scripture and Scripture's place within the life of the church. All right.